Hi everyone, my name is Vanessa van Dijk, and in today's video I want to talk again about salt and breakouts. Now I went back through everything I tracked over a long period of time, and I started asking myself, why do certain foods work so well while others don't work at all, or consistently cause problems for me? And more importantly, why do so many foods that are recommended for acne or breakouts, whether it's online, in articles, or even by some doctors, not line up with what I was seeing for myself? So instead of just accepting that, I started breaking things down more carefully, looking at what these foods actually have in common. And that's where something interesting came up. Because when you look closely at many of the foods that are commonly recommended for clearer skin, they often share one thing: they can be quite high in sodium. But not necessarily because of the food itself, more because of what has been done to it and how it's then consumed. So take fish for example. Salmon, mackerel, sardines, anchovies, they're always recommended for their healthy fats. But most people don't eat them fresh. They eat them smoked, canned or preserved, which usually comes with a lot of added salt. And that's where it gets really interesting, because the same pattern shows up with nuts. In theory, they are very simple foods, but in reality, that's not how most people eat them. They're usually roasted, salted, or come in processed mixes. So again, the sodium intake increases. And it doesn't stop there. Even foods like olives, which I've mentioned before that I had issues with, are almost always consumed in a processed form, sitting in brine, which is very high in salt. I mean, unless you live somewhere where they are freshly harvested. But otherwise, you're basically consuming a significant amount of salt with them. So at that point, it starts to look less like a specific food problem and more like a pattern related to processing and sodium intake. But then I also asked myself something else. What about the recommended foods for breakouts that actually work well for me? For example, avocado. And I always assumed it might be because of the thick skin, protecting it from external factors. And to be fair, that still kind of makes sense. But when I looked at it differently, something else stood out. It's very high in potassium. And when you follow that idea further, it becomes even more interesting. Because many foods that are often recommended for acne-prone skin are also high in potassium. Spinach or sweet potatoes. And yes, they are often praised for things like fiber. But what if that's not the full explanation? What if part of the reason they work is because they have balanced sodium? Because potassium plays a key role in how the body regulates fluids. So now, when I look back at my own data over the last 2 years, there are a few things that clearly stand out. One of them is the consistently high amount of potatoes I was eating. And also tomatoes, which showed up just as consistently. And even things like sheep milk yogurt. And you can actually see that here on the screen. Almost every meal I had was built around that. I was consistently combining them with whatever else I was eating, whether it was meat, eggs, or something else entirely. Because over time I noticed something very clear. Whenever I structured my meals that way, my skin would improve, and breakouts were simply not there. And not just slightly, it was consistent enough that I kept going back to it. So without really thinking about it, I might have been balancing things already. And I think that's where combinations start to matter. Because depending on what you eat together, you might either be increasing the overall sodium load or balancing it out through potassium-rich foods. And when you think about it, it's actually a bit ironic. Because with all these processed foods, we now have to think about balancing things again, simply because we moved so far away from how foods exist naturally. Because in their natural form, sodium tends to be much lower and potassium higher, so this kind of imbalance is far less likely to happen in the first place. But anyway, I don't want to get too philosophical here. I want to keep this practical so you can actually use it. So if you're already adjusting your diet, try to also pay attention to your salt intake, not just sugar. Especially when it comes to foods that look healthy but are actually processed or preserved, so not really in their original form anymore. And if you notice that your meals are higher in sodium, you could either reduce those foods or try to balance them with potassium-rich sources. For example, if you're eating something like a ready-made or a heavily seasoned meal, instead of pairing it with rice, you could try something like potatoes or sweet potatoes. And even small changes like that can make a big difference over time. And the same applies to when eating out, because restaurant meals or street food are almost always high in salt. That's just how they are prepared. So in those situations, it might help to keep the rest of your day a bit simpler, or again, include foods that are naturally higher in potassium to balance things out. And that's really the main idea I wanted to share, because sometimes it's not just about what you eat, but also how things combine and what you do consistently. And that's something you can only really figure out by observing it over time. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!